Back in 2022, over 2 years ago, chapter 1066 of One Piece was released. Back when this chapter came out, it was nuts. There were so many things that happened in this chapter. We learned that the Ancient Kingdom used to be futuristic. And then one of the biggest things that we learned from this chapter is that all the books that the archaeologists threw into the lake were somehow saved by the giants, and Vegapunk went and read them all and put them all into his brain and put them all into Punk records. So the will of Ohara did live on. We also learned that Vegapunk and Dragon, knew each other, and this was kind of a starting point of the Revolutionary Army. This was one of the kickoff points of why Dragon started the Revolutionaries. Then at the very end of the chapter, we actually got the reveal of what Vegapunk actually looks like today, which is crazy. One of the best chapters of that arc, absolutely. But there was one little thing about that, is that the reason that all of the books from Ohara were saved is actually because a certain Jaguar D. Saul lived through the events of Ohara, made it to Elbaph, and kept all of those books in his own library. Saul, a very important character who died in the Ohara flashback, is indeed alive and well today. We've known this fact for about 2 years now, and finally, in 2024, we are in Elbaph, and we finally get the reunion between Robin and Saul. And you know what? I just know it didn't hit for me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Me personally, as someone who is a big fan of One Piece, I prefer the more character-driven parts of the story over like the big lore reveals or the epic moments and the cool fights or the hype reveals and all that. Like the little character moments, those emotional things is really what made me fall in love with One Piece. And chapter 1133 should be one of those chapters, a very Straw Hat-centric arc, just not about the lore or like the grand story. It's just a simple thing about, a character of one of the most important characters in the story. I should be all over that. But for some reason, it just doesn't hit for me. And that's because of Saul. In my humble opinion, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but I don't think that Saul should have been brought back into the story. I was very under the impression that Saul died in the flashback in Ohara, and now that is not the case, I just don't know. So in this video, I'm just going to give more of my thoughts about this chapter, what the implications of Saul being alive is, and why I'm just not super okay with it right now, and what I think bringing Saul back into this story is going to mean for the future of One Piece. There are a lot of videos talking about this chapter, and most of them are very positive. A lot of people saying, oh, Robin deserved this moment. Oh, I've been waiting 2 decades for this. Oh, it's so emotional, it made me cry, and that's not the video that you're gonna get here. I'm sorry. Don't like being a devil's advocate. I really enjoy most chapters of One Piece, but I'm not afraid to critique my favorite story, so we're gonna do that today. I like the beginning of this chapter with a lot of the flashback stuff that we got. I like the part where Spanding was talking to all of the reporters, and it kind of gave us more insight on how like the entire world got to believe that she was the demon child. Like it was all because of this one guy. It was all because of Spanding. He was the only person that actually heard that she could read the poneglyphs. Something I gotta mention real quick though is that the translations between like the official viz and like some of like the earlier scans are very, very different during this chapter, and I very much prefer the officials this time. There is a lot of weird out of character things that happen in this chapter. Like the big emotional moment for a lot of people that the chapter is named after has Robin saying like, oh, Saul, aren't you going to praise me for being alive? Personally, I don't know what was going on with that line. I feel like there's got to be some weird mistranslation with that, because that feels very, very much like what a sociopath would say. Oh, praise me. Aren't you going to praise me for being alive? I know it's supposed to probably be read another way. And I know that like in the official translation, they're like, oh, I want to hear nice things about how I survived. And I feel like, praising for being alive and praising for surviving are two different things. That sounds like something that like Stelly or Charlos would say, you know. I don't know the right thing what that is, but it felt very out of character for me when I first read it. I will say that at least. What brought me down the most on this chapter, why this chapter is actually 0 out of 10, is because I got my expectations all high for Chopper to actually do something. You know, he even said, "Oh, I'm a doctor, I'll handle this, where's the patient?" And then Usopp was like, "This is your time to shine, Chopper. We're all counting on you, my boy. Your entire reputation is counting on this, Chopper, because you have not done anything in a while. You have not done much doctrine. I really, really needed Chopper to do some doctrine in this chapter, and we didn't get it. Chopper got nothing. You gotta give me something, Oda. You gotta give Chopper something. He's more than just a plushie." Chopper, explain to everyone why you are useless. Why are you useless, Chopper? Explain. I still love you, though. So the actual reunion, though, between Robin and Saul, it's like pretty predictable, don't you think? Like they meet up, they talk, and then they cry it out. Like that's about it. There's not really any like twist or like anything like interesting going on in the chapter. I feel like one of the reasons I love One Piece is because it's so unpredictable, you know? Sometimes like just random crazy stuff will happen in One Piece and it'll just like the story will just take a big swerve, you know? That's what I thought was gonna happen with him falling and can't getting up, you know? Because I thought, you know, that's something interesting that's happening, you know? It's not just like a predictable, it's just like, oh, Saul's alive, I'm gonna go meet Saul. I went and met Saul. That's just what happened. Nothing interesting in between those two things happened. The chapter by itself is like kind of lame. Also, back to like the whole praise me for being alive thing. I feel like the, oh, you gotta live part was more of like an Robin and Olvia thing and not a Robin and Saul thing. Saul's whole thing was like, oh, you're gonna meet new friends someday, you know, hold on to that. I was kind of hoping that would be more part of the chapter of like, oh my gosh, Robin, you finally found your new Nakama. I'm so proud of you for finding your new friends, because that was the last thing that Saul said to Robin. But we don't get that. We just gotta, oh, thank goodness you're alive. I was not a huge fan of that personally, you know? That was like the whole like emotional pivoting moment in Enies lobby is, you know, after we hear Saul talk about like, oh, go find some friends, and then the flashback ends, and then we go back to Enies lobby where they're on the roof, and then he shoots the flag, and it's like, ah, there's your friends, you know, it's a full circle. That's like that's the important part right there. And I feel like we're just glossing right over all of that, just into like the, oh, aren't you happy that I survived? I don't know. Maybe that'll all be addressed. Maybe he'll finally talk, you know, Saul and Luffy will actually talk to each other and stuff next chapter, but I feel like that was sorely missing from this chapter, personally. I need to talk about why Saul now being in the story again and being alive this entire time, it just does not work for me. First off, the actual reason they give at the moment during this chapter is like, I don't like that. I don't like that. I think that's a little bit hand wavy. Oh, the fires just from O'Hara is what melted you and then made you also just slosh right into the sea. How convenient. I feel like this is bad on like a whole bunch of reasons. Like it's especially bad for Kuzan if you think about it real hard. Like Kuzan, Aokiji, the guy who went face to face with Akainu for days upon end, to the point to where he made it to where half of an island is perpetually snowing and wintry, that his power can just be just like done by like a forest fire set by like some cannons. Like that's an Aokiji if I've ever seen one myself. It should not be that easy and convenient to just unfreeze yourself like that. Like if you go to the first time that Aokiji froze Robin and froze Luffy, Chopper had a lot to do to carefully get them unfrozen. You know, he had to like very slowly, you know, apply the shower to both of them. And, you know, Sanji and Zoro had to like jump into the ocean, you know, to stop from the frostbite and all of that. And, you know, with Saul, it was just like, I just melted from all that, and then I just slish-sloshed right into the ocean, and then I guess I, with all of that, and also possibly with just one leg now, swam to a nearby island, and just no one saw the giants, and no one cared at all. No one ever found him. He somehow made it all the way from O'Hara to Elbaph, which are pretty far from each other, if I'm correct in my calculations. It's also pretty bad for Saul's character, considering that he just went to Elbaph and decided to worry about the books more than, I don't know, maybe looking for Robin herself. You know, he was like, oh, the things that they were saying to you in the newspapers, oh, it made me so mad. Maybe you should have, I don't know, done something about that, Saul. Maybe you should have gotten off your butt. I know you were injured at the time, but it's been 2 decades. Maybe you could have done something. Maybe we'll get the best we'll get the very, very, very best reason of why Saul decided to stay in Elbaph for 20 years and never tell Robin that he was alive or anything like that. We'll get the very, very, very best of reasons next chapter, I'm sure. But for now, I don't know. I'm not a fan. Like, it's not because he's like a weakling or anything. Like, this guy's a vice admiral. Saul's a tough guy. He took out 5 warships on his own. It's pretty epic. And you're saying, like, what, is he too weak from getting frozen a little bit? Garb was a vice admiral. He broke out of Aokiji's ice. Technically, we got 2 vice admirals that have gotten out of Aokiji's ice. What does that say about Garb? What does that say about Kuzan? What does that say about Saul? You tell me. You know, if Kuzan's ice powers are just that escapable, then, like, how did this guy become an admiral, you know? Unless the actual case is what a lot of people are saying, is that Kuzan actually let Saul go. All along, he let Saul go because he's so sweet and pure of heart. If you go back and read in One Piece, a lot of times when Kuzan would talk about Saul, it really made him seem like Saul was dead. So like whenever Kuzan was met up with Blackbeard and he was like casually talking about his old friend that he had to deal with in O'Hara, and you know, all the Blackbeard prophets was like, I don't care. You know, what? So like, why would he care about lying about that? So I feel like it's more believable that Kuzan would not know that Saul is alive and did not keep him alive. I think that would completely take away like the weight of what he did in O'Hara. All of the sins that Kuzan has to live with his entire life. That has to stay with him. You know, him just being like, I froze him, but now I'm going to unfreeze him and be like, you can go now. No, he needs to know, he needs to live knowing that he killed one of his friends. Especially now after Egghead, you know, how we know that Kizaru, one of the other admirals, had to kill one of his best friends, Vegapunk, you know, and the parallels between that and Kuzan having to kill his friend during another Buster Call. You know, 2 admirals in 2 Buster Calls having to kill one of their friends. The parallel, you know, it writes itself. Well, done writes itself because Oda writes it. But if he made it to where he didn't do that, now that he hasn't done that, that parallel is gone. So Saul being alive is not great for Kuzan, for one, and it's not good for Saul either. It takes away one really good moment from Wano, too. One of the actual good moments from Wano, you know, where Saul and Olvia showed up in like a hallucination during the Black Maria fight, and, you know, Robin, you know, had to, you know, she enjoyed that at one point in time, but she still had to like get over it, knew that it wasn't real, you know, so she could defeat Black Maria and her goons. You know, it was such a good parallel with Brook at the time too, because he was going through the exact same things. You know, remember during the Brook flashback where he's asleep on the boat, and then like all of a sudden he just sees all of his dead crewmates coming up together, and like he's not a skeleton anymore. And they're like, what are you doing? Get up. What are you talking about? And he's like, oh man, I can feel this pain. It must not be a dream. I'm so glad that everyone's alive. Oh, it was just a dream. Boy, wouldn't it be terrible if that hallucination actually was real and that they actually all were alive? Boy, that sure would be terrible, wouldn't it? Like, that was such a good thing that both Brooke and Robin could connect on. And now they can't connect on that anymore because Saul's alive. Like, technically this entire time, Robin was just under the impression that Saul was dead. So a lot of like that emotional trauma of her as a child and a lot of the stuff that, you know, happened during Innie's lobby, that is still technically, like, all of those emotions can still be there, at least for Robin. For us as the reader now, in hindsight, a lot of that is gone. But, you know, technically in the world, all of the emotional baggage and trauma that Robin had to go through is still there. It just has a different taste in the mouths of us as the reader. And it's definitely different now going forward into the story. Like, now that we know that Saul's alive, if I ever want to go back and reread or rewatch Innie's lobby, like, I'll always know in the back of my head that, you know, the Straw Hats fight to save her it's going to be a little less emotional for me. Now, people obviously like this chapter. You know, there's a lot of praise for this chapter going on right now. So there's obviously got to be some devil's advocates for this. There's got to be some people that, you know, don't mind a lot of this. So I'm going to go over that a little bit, or at least some defenses that, like, I came up with at least. Some of these are just going to be minor nitpicks, by the way. Like, my biggest defense of this is how it drives the story forward now that it's happened, and when it comes to all the books of O'Hara and Vegapunk. I feel like they made it pretty clear in that flashback that when Vegapunk saw all the books in the lake, that he would not be able to do anything about that. He could not just go and take all those books to Punk Hazard and without looking like super sus. And the Giants of Elbaph would have no reason to go in and take all of the books from that lake. Him being able to get all those books and then take them to Elbaph and then be able to share them with Vegapunk, that was a good enough reason for me of why that was all needed. This is all, at least when it comes to how we're keeping the will of O'Hara preserved. Saul knowing all that and being able to do something about that, I felt like that was a good enough reason at the time to bring him back. It at least gives him a reason to be doing anything in the story currently, just as a character. You know, how it affects, you know, his relationship with Robin now that he's alive, I'm not so sure about, but at least as a character who is doing important things to the future plot of the One Piece world, I was satisfied enough with that. Also, another little thing that people don't really bring up all that much is that this is the only character in any Straw Hat flashback that could feasibly come back for a reunion. He did write in such a way that he did have a scapegoat at the time with the whole freezing thing. A lot of the deaths and sacrifices in a lot of the other flashbacks were very much more concrete, like with Here Look and Belmare. Technically, Sabo did come back too, but I feel like if you just read the end of that flashback, it's pretty obvious that Sabo was alive. I'm pretty sure that they don't ever hide it. So I'm not counting that one. Like, can you imagine if any other Straw Hat got a reunion like this, and how awful that would be? If any character that sacrificed themselves in any of these Straw Hat flashbacks, if they all of a sudden came back and had an emotional, like, oh, I missed you so much moment, garbage. People would be hating it, you know? Like, for example, like Nami and Belmare. Oh my gosh, that would be the worst. Chopper and Here Look, that would be the worst. Sanji and his mom, that would be the worst. Frankie and Tom, you know, technically, Tom looked more alive than Saul did at the end of their flashbacks, you know. Saul, I think, you know, had a way less chance of coming back than Tom because he just went to prison. That'd be pretty bad. Jinbei and Fisher Tiger. Oh, I missed you so much, Fisher. I can't even imagine that in my brain. But for some reason, Saul and Robin are the exception to the rule in all this. Why? Why, I ask? A lot of people have said, oh, it's because Robin went through so much and she just deserves this moment. And to that I say, who doesn't deserve this moment? You know, are we now, comparing suffering by value? You know, does she deserve it more than Nami, who was practically a slave for most of her childhood? For Frankie, who, had to rebuild himself after getting run over by a train? For Brooke, who had to spend 50 years in isolation? Which Straw Hat doesn't deserve this reunion? Please tell me. Please tell me why Robin is the only person who deserves this. Is it just because of the literal, amount of deaths in the flashback? Because, let's not forget that Olvia did not know Robin at all. Robin and Olvia did not know each other. Robin only knew Saul for, a couple of weeks. Clover was probably the most important person in Robin's life. Why did Clover not adopt her? Why did Olvia leave Robin with her terrible in-laws? Robin never even liked the people of O'Hara beforehand. They all hated her. And so when they all died, I guess that would be effective as a little girl. But personally, it's just all those people hated you. So who cares? When you look at a lot of the other Straw Hat flashbacks, you'll see Brooke and Yorkie were probably on this crew for a long time. Frankie was probably raised by Tom for a long time. Belmare was Nami's mom for her whole childhood and was there. Chopper and Heerlook, they were probably together for a long time, enough to the point where Heerlook considered Chopper his son. All I'm saying is that Robin's flashback was not any worse than the others, and it's not very healthy to compare each other's suffering by just sheer amount. But all I'm saying is that when people say, oh, Robin deserves this moment, this is Robin's moment that she deserves, I cannot agree with that. I am sorry. So here's the question. 1,133 chapters in, where do we go from here now that Saul's alive? He's here now. He's not going away. So what can the story in One Piece do to justify him being here? First off, he has to give Luffy and the rest of the crew a proper thank you for saving Robin and being her friend, because that was his whole emotional climax in the story about that, and they kind of skipped over that in this last chapter, so they really need to address that in the next chapter at least. The worst case scenario is that Saul almost immediately dies again, because contrary to popular belief, killing a character that probably should have died anyways but came back, just killing them again, that is not gonna just somehow fix the situation. Especially if it's because Loki kills him, and especially if it's because Luffy somehow frees Loki during this arc. That's my actual biggest concern right now, because I already don't think that it'll be in character for Luffy to let Loki free just for information on Shanks. I feel why would Luffy, Luffy's not that stupid. Why would Luffy care that much about getting info like that? And the whole also just I'll destroy one pirate crew that you want me to. Luffy doesn't care about that at all. He can deal with himself. So I can't think of a good reason why Luffy would go and just free Loki at this point in time. And just I have a feeling that he probably is, and it's going to stink. And worst case scenario is that Loki goes and immediately kills Saul for some reason, and then we just have to deal with that emotional pain again. The people who like this chapter would hate that, and the people who dislike this chapter would also hate that. So that's probably what's going to happen. But I hope not. Now, the obvious thing that we're probably going to get in the next coming chapters is probably Saul showing Robin and the rest of the crew all of the books that he was able to get from O'Hara, and maybe we'll get some new actual lore information. One thing that I think could possibly happen is that we could possibly get the name of the ancient kingdom, because Clover knew that with all the information that he had. So it is possible that Saul could have that information somewhere. Now, the big problem I have with that is that we know that Vegapunk came and read all the books and has it memorized in his head because he has the brain food, the Nomi Nomi no Mi. So we know that all of that information that Saul has is already in Lilith's brain, who is right there, and also in Punk Records. So I feel like anything that we learn in there, you know, Lilith would be like, oh yeah, I already knew that. I probably could have just told you that. The only things that she might not know is if there are any like poneglyph readings or poneglyphs in Saul's library. Now, that would be dumb. We know that there was a big poneglyph in the basement of the tree, but like that would be actually unbelievable. Saul getting away already is like super unbelievable, but the idea of Saul or any of the giants taking an entire poneglyph from Ohara all the way to Elbaph without any of the Marines knowing, like, I know that it's already kind of dumb that they're like, oh, the stupid Marines didn't understand that the books in the lake were important. I already kind of am like cap on that, but if they let a poneglyph go too, a poneglyph that Cypherpole like confirmed was there, if they let that go too, and they're like, oh yeah, we took that to Elbaph, that'd be bad. That'd be not good. That'd be not great. Another little theory that I have that could happen is that we get a Mother Carmel connection, because we know that Mother Carmel was one of the ways that the giants were initially recruited into the Marines. And we know that, you know, Saul was a Marine all the way up to a Vice Admiral. So I feel like it can be easily concluded that Saul was one of the recruits from Mother Carmel. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, Saul isn't from Elbaph. And like, he says like, oh, I'm not one of them like dumb, you know, warriors from Elbaph. But that doesn't mean like he didn't reside from there. I feel like it kind of makes sense that all of the giants still came from Elbaph, or else, you know, is there another place where giants come from? That would be a big deal that we wouldn't know about. And why wouldn't he go there instead of to Elbaph? So he's definitely from Elbaph, and I feel like there's a Mother Carmel connection. And in, you know, the faraway 1% chance that Big Mom is somehow alive and somehow goes to Elbaph for some reason during this arc, you know, that could somehow be like a connection of like Saul being like, oh yeah, Mother Carmel, you know, does this and that and that. And, you know, maybe that'll, you know, spike back up the memories of Big Mom, and she'll remember, you know, that day where she may or may not have eaten Mother Carmel. She definitely ate Mother Carmel, but everyone else, we don't know. I honestly do not know what Big Mom is going to do in this arc, if she's even alive. But that's just a little fun theory that I had, is that, you know, there's somehow going to be a Mother Carmel connection between Saul and possibly Big Mom. Another theory that I had is that, you know, on the off chance that it's revealed down the line that Kuzan, you know, let Saul go, is that they could both be still undercover for the Marines, because they're both ex-Marines right now, but they could still both be undercover, you know, in Sword. I feel like that's not the case anymore, because they've kind of made it to where Sword isn't like, oh, like a secret Marine thing. It's more of just like a, oh, we're Marines who can do whatever we want. You know, they kind of changed what our initial thoughts of what Sword are. So I don't know if it would make sense if Saul was in Sword at this point with everything that's happened. But, you know, could be a possibility, so I would bring it up. But like, what is happening right now in this arc? You know, we got like a nice like character reunion, but not a lot of like plot going forwardness. Like we just got out of like the little Lego world stuff, which wasn't a waste of time. I enjoyed it and stuff, but it's just like, what is going on right now? We got Loki down there, and then we also have like the silhouetted man with the straw hat and the gas mask. Like, there are like people doing something in this arc, but like, we still don't know what. And like, right now, everyone's just happy. All the giants are just happy that they're there and they're making a banquet. I feel like there is no way that this banquet is going to happen, because we already got a little banquet when we left Egghead, which they kind of didn't really deserve. You know, they didn't really beat anyone. They kind of just ran away and got lucky that a giant robot made all the Gorosei just like Thanos snap away. So they definitely don't deserve two banquets after that, you know? Luffy, you gotta work for your banquet, sir. You know, you hadn't done the beating the sun god in the Lego kingdom doesn't count. So surely something needs to go down. The story needs to, be spiced up a little bit before that banquet starts. Because if they're just like, Saul, lore about this, then we go back and we eat. Like, why? That's like a waste of space. That is not interesting to me. So something's going to happen. Surely. I am like 99% sure that banquet is not happening. In conclusion, though, regardless, the Band-Aid has been ripped off. It was starting to peel off 2 years ago in 1066, and now in 1133, it is completely ripped off. Saul lived. There is no longer a world in a lot of our brains where Saul did not live. That's just not the case anymore. So you gotta deal with it. So now that we're at that point, I'm still interested in where things go. Am I excited? I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this arc so far. Leaving Wano and going into Egghead was so fun and interesting for me that it made me want to start making One Piece videos in the first place. And honestly, the start of like all this Lego stuff, all that mystery made me get back into it this year. So, but now that we're actually in Elbaph proper, I don't know. I don't know how I feel yet. I still need a little bit more time in this arc for me to really know how I'm liking it. There's still a lot of loose ends with Egghead, with Vegapunk, and Kuma, what Lilith and Bonnie are up to, and what are they going to do this arc? Are they going to officially become Straw Hats, or are they just going to be tag-alongs for the rest of the time? I don't know. All of these things we're going to have to figure out in 2025. And regardless, of me critiquing this, I do this because I love it. I love One Piece. It is very important to me. It's near and dear to my heart, but, it's not perfect. And it's still fun to talk about, even if it's not. So we're going to hopefully talk about it some more in 2025, see where things go, see what happens. I'm Nate's Logic. Thank y'all for watching. Have a good one, I do declare.